Ma'am, hold up a second. Let's set the bag down. You need to step aside with me.
Is there a problem?
Routine check. Open it up, please.
You just watched me come through security.
So
What
need
is
you
this about?
expected? Step over here.
I have a boarding call in 10 minutes. Can you tell me why?
Ma'am, I'm not asking again. Set the bag down.
I'm cooperating. Just explain what's going on.
Security footage from that Wednesday at 6:47 in the morning would eventually reveal the complete sequence of events. A professionally dressed African-American woman, appearing to be in her late 40s, made her way across the airport, dragging a compact suitcase. She had on a dark blue jacket and off-white shirt and moved with understated assurance. From the other side of the terminal, Officer Greg Palmer noticed her, and his demeanor shifted noticeably. He began approaching her deliberately, his hand already reaching toward his equipment belt. This officer had no idea he'd just committed the gravest error of his professional life, a blunder that would destroy everything he'd built in his career and reveal a troubling pattern that had remained concealed for an extended period. Before moving forward, I'm curious to know where you're viewing this from. Share your location or country in the comments section. For those just joining us, please click subscribe. This account becomes even more gripping, and you'll want to see how it unfolds. Monica Freeman had served as a judge for 8 years. Prior to that, she'd worked as a prosecutor for 12 years, successfully convicting some of the state's most dangerous offenders. She'd witnessed everything: killers, robbers, dishonest officials, and deceivers of all varieties. She understood the legal system thoroughly. Her knowledge of her rights surpassed that of most attorneys, and she certainly recognized when those rights were being trampled. That particular morning, she was headed to an out-of-state conference where she was scheduled to deliver a presentation on equity in the legal system. The situational irony of her impending experience wouldn't escape those who later learned her story. Near Gate 14, Officer Palmer intercepted her. Without proper introduction or justification, he commanded her to halt. Monica complied, bewildered yet composed. She inquired whether something was wrong. His response was vague. Instead, he questioned her destination. She explained she was boarding a flight like every other airport patron. He demanded to see her ticket. She retrieved her mobile device and displayed her electronic boarding pass. He gave it barely a glance. Next, he requested identification. Monica extracted her driver's license from her bag and presented it. He examined it extensively, far beyond what was necessary. He questioned where she'd come from. She informed him she'd just driven from her residence to the airport. He asked her home location. She responded courteously, though she was beginning to comprehend the situation. All around them, other travelers moved freely. A young Caucasian male wearing casual athletic clothing and a sweatshirt walked directly past without drawing the officer's attention. An older white woman struggling with 3 oversized bags passed nearby, receiving neither assistance nor scrutiny from the officer. Monica observed all of this. She developed the habit of observing everything. It was integral to her profession. Officer Palmer inquired about Monica's occupation. This question served no legitimate security function, as she well knew. Nevertheless, she responded, stating simply that she worked in the legal field. He pressed for specifics. She indicated criminal law. He made an expression suggesting disbelief. He instructed her to move aside as he needed to inspect her luggage. Monica understood that arbitrary bag inspections occurred at airports. However, this wasn't arbitrary. She was being singled out based on race, becoming increasingly apparent with each moment. Still, having nothing to conceal, she stepped aside with him. Compliance and documentation seemed wiser than providing any justification for escalation. He unsealed her compact suitcase right there in the public terminal. He removed her clothing items one at a time, underclothes, sleepwear, her toiletries bag, arranging them on a nearby bench in full view of passing travelers. Other passengers gawked. Some appeared sympathetic. Others averted their eyes quickly, feeling embarrassment on her behalf. Monica remained standing with her hands folded before her, her expression neutral. Internally, however, she was enraged. Quick question for everyone. Have you or anyone you know experienced something similar? Comment yes if so. He thoroughly examined her toiletries, opening her cosmetics, removing caps from her small containers of lotion and fragrance. He compressed her toothpaste tube. His thoroughness felt personal, as though he intended to degrade her. Perhaps that was indeed his intention. Naturally, he discovered nothing, no weapons, no prohibited substances, nothing remotely questionable. simply the ordinary possessions of a professional woman embarking on a 3-day work trip. But Officer Palmer wasn't finished. He announced he needed to inspect her handbag. She handed it over. He emptied the contents onto the bench beside her clothing: wallet, keys, phone charger, cosmetics bag, a book she was currently reading, various receipts, chewing gum, hand sanitizer, and a small work notebook. He picked up the notebook and began browsing through it. This violated yet another boundary. Her work notes potentially contained confidential material. She stated firmly yet politely that the notebook held privileged legal content and he lacked authority to examine it. He disregarded her. He continued flipping pages, unhurried. Monica retrieved her phone and began filming. The instant she raised the device, Officer Palmer's entire disposition transformed. He ordered her to lower the phone. She calmly asserted her right to film a public servant executing their responsibilities in a public area. He moved nearer, violating her personal space. He reiterated his command to put away the phone. She refused. She continued recording. At this point, his colleague, Officer Linda Chavez, approached. Officer Chavez asked what was transpiring. Palmer claimed he was performing a standard security inspection. Chavez observed the bench scattered with Monica's possessions, noticed Monica holding up her phone, and appeared to sense something improper was occurring. She questioned Palmer about his selection criteria for this particular traveler. He claimed it was random. Chavez glanced around at all the other unscreened passengers and raised an eyebrow, though she remained silent. Monica addressed Officer Chavez directly. She stated she was experiencing racial profiling and harassment. She noted she'd complied with every demand, presented identification and boarding credentials, permitted bag searches, and nothing suspicious had emerged. She requested Officer Palmer's badge number and his supervisor's name. She delivered this in a calm, articulate voice, the voice she employed in her courtroom when rendering life-altering judgments. Officer Palmer took offense at this. He accused her of being disruptive. She wasn't being disruptive. She stood motionless, spoke in regular tones, and simply advocated for herself, but Palmer appeared to need justification. He threatened that if she didn't settle down, he'd have her ejected from the airport. She responded that she was entirely calm and requested his badge number again. He reached for her arm. This constituted his second worst decision of that day, immediately after initially targeting her. The moment his hand contacted her arm, Monica clearly declared she didn't consent to physical contact and that she wasn't under arrest. She demanded the grounds for her detention. He claimed she was detained for suspicious conduct. She asked him to identify the specific suspicious behavior. He couldn't provide a coherent answer. Officer Chavez appeared increasingly uneasy. She quietly proposed to Palmer that perhaps they should summon a supervisor. Palmer gave her an irritated look. He'd committed too deeply to this course now, too invested in his chosen path. He told Monica she needed to accompany him to the security office for further screening. Monica asked whether she was being arrested. He said no. She asked if she was free to leave. He said no. She noted he couldn't maintain both positions simultaneously. A small crowd had formed by now. People were observing, some filming with their own devices. Airport incidents like this tended to draw attention. Palmer seemed to recognize this and disliked it. He elevated his voice and told everyone to disperse. Most people remained. They sensed wrongdoing and understood their presence might shield this woman from whatever this officer planned. Monica missed her flight, naturally. By the time Palmer finally relented and released her, when a supervisor eventually arrived and rapidly evaluated the situation, her flight had already departed. The supervisor, a weary-looking man in his 50s, apologized to Monica. He offered rebooking assistance, but Monica had no interest in his apologies. She requested his name and employee identification. She requested Palmer's complete information. She requested contact details for the Airport Police Department's Internal Affairs Division and their Civilian Oversight Board. She requested names and contact information for every witness who'd stopped to observe. The supervisor became less apologetic and more protective. He claimed Palmer had been performing his duties. Monica smiled for the first time since this ordeal began, though it wasn't a warm smile. She said she anticipated explaining in federal court precisely what she thought of how Officer Palmer performed his duties. She didn't reveal she was a judge. Not yet. She wanted to observe how they'd handle a complaint from someone they presumed was merely an ordinary citizen without influence. She wanted to see whether they'd take her seriously, investigate appropriately, and hold Palmer accountable, or whether they'd protect their own. She had a fairly strong prediction, which it would be. What's your prediction about what happened when she filed her complaint? Do you believe they handled it seriously? Monica rescheduled her flight for later that afternoon. She relocated to a secluded corner of the airport and spent the following 2 hours documenting everything that had occurred. Every detail she could recall with exact times based on her phone's recording timestamp. She noted the names and numbers she'd gathered. She uploaded her video footage to cloud storage, then forwarded it to herself at 3 separate email addresses. She understood how evidence could mysteriously vanish. When she reached her conference that evening, she delivered her scheduled presentation. However, now she possessed a fresh, personal illustration to incorporate into her discussion about systemic injustice. The audience was stunned. Multiple attorneys approached her subsequently and volunteered their assistance. She thanked them, but indicated she had alternative plans. Upon returning home the next week, Monica submitted a formal complaint to the airport police department. She included her written account, her video evidence, and contact information for 17 witnesses who had provided their details. She forwarded copies to local news outlets, the State Aviation Authority, and the Federal Transportation Department. She also sent a copy to the state's largest civil rights law firm, accompanied by a letter expressing interest in legal action. The police department's response arrived 3 weeks later. It was a generic letter thanking her for her complaint and notifying her that the matter had been investigated and handled internally. No specifics, no admission of fault, no explanation of what handled internally entailed. The letter bore the signature of someone in human resources whose name she didn't recognize. This was precisely what Monica had anticipated, and this was when she disclosed her identity. She convened a press conference. She wore her judicial robe. She sat at a table with her attorney beside her, a formidable civil rights lawyer named Rebecca Okonkwo, who'd secured millions in damages from police departments nationwide. Monica recounted her story comprehensively. She screened portions of her video. Then she announced she was filing a federal lawsuit against Officer Greg Palmer, Officer Linda Chavez for failing to intervene, the supervisor for his insufficient response, and the airport police department for perpetuating a culture permitting racial profiling to thrive. The story went viral. Local news covered it initially, then regional outlets, then national media. A judge had been profiled and degraded at an airport. The video documented everything. It was crisp, well-illuminated, and incriminating. There was no way to reframe this, no way to argue it was misrepresented. The footage was self-evident. Officer Palmer's record surfaced quickly thereafter. Monica's legal team subpoenaed his personnel file. It revealed he had 7 prior complaints for racial profiling. 7. All from Black and Hispanic travelers, all dismissed or resulting in minimal discipline like written warnings. One complaint originated from a Black military officer in uniform returning from deployment. Another from a Black physician who'd been traveling to conduct emergency surgery. Palmer had targeted them all, and the department had shielded him every single time. The airport police department issued a statement claiming they took the allegations seriously and were conducting a comprehensive review. They placed Palmer on administrative leave with full pay. This only intensified public anger. Why was he receiving a paid break while the judge he'd degraded had to retain lawyers and re-experience her trauma? Additional victims began emerging. Once the news broke, people who'd been stopped and searched by Palmer without justification found their courage. The legal team gathered statements from 43 people over the subsequent 2 months. 43 individuals who described identical patterns. Palmer would identify a Black or Hispanic person, especially those who appeared well-dressed or successful, and single them out for searches. It seemed he couldn't tolerate seeing people of color who were thriving, as if he needed to subjugate them, remind them of his authority over them. One woman described how Palmer had caused her to miss her father's funeral. Another recounted how his prolonged detention made her miss a job interview she'd spent months preparing for. A college student stated Palmer had examined his bag while making derogatory remarks about whether his designer clothing was authentic or counterfeit, insinuating theft. The accounts continued endlessly. The lawsuit proceeded. The airport police department attempted dismissal. The presiding judge, not Monica obviously, but a federal judge, declined. Discovery commenced. Monica's legal team requested documents, emails, training records, and complaint files. They deposed Palmer, whose testimony was disastrous. He was defensive, combative, and couldn't supply adequate justifications for why he'd stopped Monica, and so thoroughly searched her belongings. His attorney attempted arguing Palmer had followed his training and instincts. Monica's attorney asked him to explain what specific conduct Monica had displayed that warranted such scrutiny. Palmer claimed she appeared nervous. The attorney played the video which showed Monica appearing completely composed. Palmer said she was traveling with insufficient luggage, which was suspicious. The attorney observed that she was taking a 3-day trip, and her luggage was suitable for that duration. Palmer mentioned something about her itinerary being suspicious. The attorney noted she was flying from her home city to a major metropolitan area for a well-documented legal conference. Nothing about any of it was suspicious. Do you believe Palmer genuinely thought he'd done nothing wrong, or did he understand exactly what he was doing? The trial occurred 11 months after the initial incident. It spanned 8 days. The courtroom was filled to capacity every single day. News cameras assembled outside. Monica testified for 4 hours. She was poised, thorough, and believable. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She simply relayed the truth about what happened and its emotional impact. She discussed the humiliation of having her undergarments displayed on a bench publicly, the invasion of having her personal items dumped and searched through, the fear when Palmer seized her arm, uncertain how far he'd escalate, the frustration of missing her flight and nearly missing her speaking engagement, and the deeper anguish of being treated like a criminal in her own nation simply due to her skin color. The witnesses testified. One after another, they described their encounters with Palmer. The pattern was irrefutable. The jury heard from airport employees who acknowledged noticing Palmer's conduct, but didn't report it due to fear of retaliation. They heard from a former airport police officer who'd resigned specifically because he was appalled by the department's tolerance of racial profiling. An expert on unconscious bias and law enforcement conduct testified about how Palmer's actions matched the textbook pattern of racial profiling. A statistician demonstrated that Palmer had searched black passengers at a rate 17 times higher than white passengers, despite discovering contraband at the same minimal rate across all racial categories. This proved his targeting of black travelers wasn't effective security practice. It was simply racism. Palmer's defense attempted portraying him as a committed officer performing a challenging job. They presented character witnesses claiming he was a decent man, but reconciling their descriptions with the evidence was impossible. Decent men don't humiliate innocent individuals. Decent men don't disregard 7 complaints and persist with identical behavior. Decent men don't grab a woman's arm when she politely requests a badge number. Officer Chavez testified that she'd felt uncomfortable during the incident, but didn't know how to respond. She acknowledged suggesting calling a supervisor, but Palmer had declined. She admitted she should have done more to prevent what was happening. Her testimony actually strengthened Monica's case because it demonstrated that even Palmer's own partner recognized something was amiss. The supervisor who'd finally intervened attempted defending the department's complaint procedures. Monica's attorney asked why a judge's complaint had received only a generic letter response. He had no satisfactory answer. The attorney asked why Palmer had been permitted to continue working despite 7 previous complaints. He mumbled something about progressive discipline and due process. The attorney asked whether the department would have shown such patience with 7 complaints against a black officer. The supervisor didn't respond. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with a verdict favoring Monica on every single charge. They determined that Palmer had violated her civil rights through racial profiling and unlawful detention. They determined that Chavez had failed in her obligation to intervene. They determined that the supervisor had been negligent in his response. And most significantly, they determined that the airport police department had maintained policies and a culture allowing racial profiling to persist unchecked. The damages award astonished everyone. The jury awarded Monica $200,000 in compensatory damages for her pain and suffering. Then they awarded her $4.8 million in punitive damages intended to punish the defendants and discourage future misconduct. The total was $5 million, $5 million for a security stop lasting approximately 40 minutes. But it was never truly about the money. It was about the message. The airport police department appealed naturally. They argued the punitive damages were unreasonable. The appellate court disagreed. The appellate judges noted that the department had disregarded 7 previous complaints about the same officer, establishing a pattern of deliberate indifference to constitutional rights. The damages were affirmed in full, but the money was merely the beginning of the consequences. The genuine karma went much deeper. Officer Greg Palmer was terminated 3 days after the verdict. His police certification was stripped, meaning he could never work in law enforcement again. He was 47 years old and had devoted his entire adult life to being a cop. Now he'd have to find a new career, explaining to every potential employer why he'd been fired and why his face had been all over the news. Officer Chavez was suspended for 6 months without compensation and demoted. She eventually departed the force, and last anyone heard, she was working in private security, earning less money, and living with the knowledge that she'd failed to do the right thing when it mattered. The supervisor retired earlier than intended, quietly and without the ceremony typically given to long-term employees. His reputation was destroyed. His pension remained intact, but his legacy was permanently associated with his failure to address Palmer's obvious pattern of misconduct. The entire airport police department was placed under federal supervision. A consent decree mandated them to implement new training on racial bias, establish a genuine complaint investigation system with civilian oversight, and submit to monitoring by an independent expert for 5 years. Every racial profiling complaint would now be investigated by external parties, and the outcomes would be publicly disclosed. 17 officers were investigated based on information emerging during Monica's trial. 8 of them were terminated. 4 were suspended. The remainder received formal discipline that entered their permanent records. The department's leadership was purged. The chief retired. 2 assistant chiefs were demoted or transferred. But Monica still wasn't finished. She used her portion of the settlement to create a legal fund specifically for victims of airport racial profiling. The fund offered free legal representation to anyone who believed they'd been targeted due to their race. Within the first year, the fund accepted 32 cases. 11 resulted in settlements. 4 proceeded to trial, and all 4 prevailed. The fund also advocated for legislative reform. Monica testified before her state legislature about the necessity for improved oversight of airport security personnel. She addressed congressional committees about the problem at the federal level. Laws were modified, policies were revised, training was enhanced at least in some locations. Palmer attempted suing Monica back, alleging she had defamed him. His lawsuit was dismissed almost instantly. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and everything Monica stated about him was demonstrably true. His attorney probably knew the lawsuit would fail but filed it regardless, perhaps hoping to intimidate her or deplete her resources. It accomplished neither. It simply made Palmer appear even worse. 3 years after the incident, Monica campaigned for a seat on her state's Supreme Court. During the campaign, she discussed openly what had happened to her at the airport. She used it as an illustration of why the courts needed judges who understood injustice from personal experience, not merely legal theory. She won the election by a substantial margin. She became Justice Freeman, one of 9 individuals with the authority to interpret the law for millions of citizens. Meanwhile, Palmer's life went in the opposite direction. He bounced between jobs, nothing stable. He attempted staying out of the public eye, but the internet never forgets. His name was permanently connected to that airport video. Future employers would invariably discover it. His children got harassed at school because of what their father had done. His marriage collapsed under the pressure. These weren't outcomes Monica wished upon him, but they were the natural consequences of his choices. The airport installed a memorial in the terminal where Monica had been stopped. Not exactly a memorial, more like a commemorative plaque. It acknowledged what had occurred there and committed the airport to treating all travelers with dignity and respect. Some people considered it performative. Perhaps it was, but it also meant that thousands of travelers daily walked past a reminder that racial profiling was real, wrong, and wouldn't be tolerated. Would you have done what Monica did, or would you have simply let it go and moved on? 5 years after the incident, Monica gave an interview to a national magazine. She was asked whether she had forgiven Officer Palmer. She said forgiveness was complex. She didn't hate him. She didn't spend her time thinking about him. But she also didn't feel obligated to absolve him of responsibility for what he'd done to her and countless others. She said she hoped he'd learned something and become a better person. But that wasn't her concern. Her concern was ensuring it didn't happen to the next person. She was asked whether the lawsuit and everything that followed had been worthwhile. She said absolutely, not because of the money, which she'd mostly donated to the legal fund and various civil rights organizations, but because standing up to injustice was always worthwhile, even when it was difficult, even when it was draining, even when people told her to simply let it go and move on. She was asked what guidance she would offer to others who experienced racial profiling or police misconduct. She said to document everything. Record if you can safely do so. Obtain witness names and contact information. Write down every detail while it's fresh. File complaints through every available channel. Don't assume the system will work, but don't let that prevent you from trying. Find quality lawyers who believe in your cause and remember that you're not fighting solely for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. The airport where it all happened is different now, at least somewhat. Officers are more cautious. Complaints are taken more seriously. The culture shifted, driven by federal oversight and the fear of another costly lawsuit. It's not perfect. Nowhere is perfect. But it's improved from what it was, and that transformation happened because one woman refused to accept being treated as less than human. Monica still travels regularly for her work on the Supreme Court. She still goes through airports. Sometimes she sees security officers who recognize her. Most look away quickly, embarrassed. A few have approached her to apologize on behalf of their profession. She accepts these apologies graciously, though she knows one decent officer doesn't erase the system's problems. And sometimes when she's walking through an airport terminal, she sees a young black woman or man being pulled aside for extra screening. When the circumstances permit, when it seems appropriate, she stops. She observes. She lets the officers know someone is paying attention. And if things appear wrong, she's not afraid to ask questions or retrieve her phone. She knows from experience how much difference it can make when someone witnesses, when someone cares, when someone refuses to simply walk by. Officer Greg Palmer made a choice that Wednesday morning at 6:47 a.m. He saw a successful black woman and decided she needed to be put in her place. He thought he possessed the power, and she had none. He thought he could humiliate her and continue with his day, consequence-free, just like he'd done to so many others. He was wrong. And that mistake cost him everything while teaching a lesson that echoed far beyond one airport terminal. Justice isn't always swift, and it's not always certain. But sometimes, when courageous people fight for it, justice does arrive. And that's precisely what happened here. Thanks for staying with this story until the end. If you learned something or this made you think differently about anything, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.